What's wrong with Batman? What's wrong with Superman? Who's playing the Flash now, and where is Green Lantern? Can you just start everything over but keep Wonder Woman? All these timeless characters, all these concepts and themes and dramatic narratives that have been told and retold hundreds of times over. Why can't Warner Brothers just fix all this DC Extended Cinematic Universe nonsense and make it work at least as well as the Marvel Cinematic Universe? It's so easy, so obvious that anyone, including me, I could tell you what the problem is and where to go from here. Hi, I'm Dan Larson, and this is why you can't fix the DC Extended Universe. DC Comics, owned by Warner Brothers, used to be the big movie and TV titan when it came to comics-inspired entertainment. Through the 70s, 80s, and 90s, it seemed like they always had the edge on Marvel. Even the worst Bat franchise was more successful than whatever Marvel was able to put on a screen during that time. Meanwhile, during that same 3-decade period, Marvel Comics was dominating the print world, known for the wholeness of their universe-wide continuity. How do I know Marvel was dominating DC Comics? That they were better and more popular? Because I was a kid at the time, and I asked a bunch of other kids, and we all agreed that DC was the pits and Marvel was aces. Sure, DC would create an industry-redefining work of visual storytelling art like Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns or Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons' Watchmen, but even a monkey can write Shakespeare if you give him enough time. Is that how that goes? Was it just a matter of storytelling? Was it the appeal of Marvel characters over DC's or vice versa? Was it just the execution, the vision, the business savvy of DC at the movies and Marvel in print? This new age of comic book blockbusters began in the year 2000 with the release of Marvel's X-Men. Despite the fact that, yes, Blade came out in 1998, history has never given appropriate credit to black pioneers. In 2000, DC was 3 years off of the George Clooney Batman and Robin and the Shaquille O'Neal Steel movies, both released in 1997. Things had officially changed. The tables had turned at the cinema. It's weird because the DC Cinematic Universe was, from the start, in a much better position to do what Marvel did with its movie universe. Marvel's properties had been sold off to a variety of companies to try to keep themselves solvent. Warner Brothers owned everything related to DC then, and still does now, by the way. Warner Brothers should have been the factory of cinematic crossover extravaganzas. DC should have been carrying that flag all along. Batman Begins, released in 2005, 2 years before Iron Man, should have been the beginning of their cinematic universe. When Superman Returns was released in 2006, and the two franchises made no attempt to be clearly connected to each other, was the moment that Marvel took over the box office for the next decade plus. DC would still rake in a ton of cash from The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises, but the rest of the story is a parade of starts and stops, a return to television, and a loss of prominence as the most popular, most internationally recognized branch of the comics industry. Fans and critics would begin the assault on DC and Warner Brothers for not having the same long-term strategy that Marvel had. And yeah, let's call that a lack of vision, lowercase v. They've been scrambling to catch up ever since. But here's the thing, DC's core has a longer history in the comics and as a comics universe. DC was forced to deal with the issue of multi-generational legacy characters earlier in their corporate strategy. And by that, I mean characters who've had their stories go on for longer than the amount of time that they have existed in the real world. DC showed us that origins, universes, have to be periodically updated or completely lose all relevance to the audience that they're trying to sell to. At some point, Clark Kent can't be a newspaper reporter because newspapers don't exist anymore. Superman and Batman have been around since the 30s, Wonder Woman since the 40s, Spider-Man and the X-Men, the Avengers as we know them didn't even exist until the 60s. DC was forced into the position of addressing all the wackiness of the golden age of comics in a manner that Marvel was never confronted with. How do you reconcile a legitimate dramatic Superman for the 70s and 80s with a guy who had different powers whenever he needed them from issue to issue with little or no carryover from one month to the next? DC's attempt to reconcile all of this was 1985's Crisis on Infinite Earths, which directly addresses this idea that there are an infinite number of Earths where all of these different eras of DC Comics publication history were existing simultaneously and really needed to be unified so they would have some degree of storytelling relevance to each other, you know, be more like Marvel's universe with their line-wide continuity and whatnot. Crisis on Infinite Earths did solve the problem, at least for a little while. Time rolls on and eventually they found themselves in the position yet again of having to start the whole thing over, keep some of the new stuff, bring back some of the old stuff, and again try to clarify, unify, and streamline the whole thing for new readers who can't go back to the beginning and read everything that has ever been made up to that point. It's a pattern that now occurs at both Marvel and DC about every 3 or 4 years, and that gap is getting closer together all the time. The DC Extended Universe is now technically only 5 years old, that's it! And in that 5-year period, DC tried to fold time in on itself to deliver the amount of world building that Marvel did in twice as much time. Like they were producing the Wikipedia version of the Marvel rollout. Just hit the bullet points, cite things where you can, and leave the rest up to whoever writes the next part. The result has been a muddled, rushed, confusing, disjointed series of movies and TV shows that might, sometimes have superficial connections, but also are directly connected or not. And especially when you compare it to what Marvel has done, it looks like it's a complete mess, a total failed corporate strategy from the beginning. But I submit to you that this is not a failing of the DC brand. This is the DC brand. DC recently announced that their strategy going forward is not to try to copy Marvel's way of handling their shared universe, but to go in the direction they have always gone in. Let the movies be whatever they are and deal with it later if necessary. They are actually embracing a philosophy of, if it can be fixed later, then whether it's broke or not is irrelevant. Wonder Woman was a success partly because it didn't worry about the bigger happenings of the DC cinematic universe, and that's what Warner Brothers wants to see from now on. Some of the movies will have some interconnectivity, and others, they're just going to be standalone stories that will play to the strengths of whatever the character is and whoever happens to be contracted to make the film. If they cross over, great. If not, that's great too. And maybe along the way, one of these movie-making monkeys will type out a piece of industry-redefining film art that changes everything. For now, DC isn't going to be hung up on trying to be Marvel anymore. They're just gonna be DC, because Infinite Earths is who they've always been. And hey, if things get too confusing, when there are too many people playing Superman across different media, when the time comes to start over, then just Crisis on Infinite Earths the whole thing. Roll out a big event that finally brings all of these individual, seemingly disconnected pieces of movies, comics, TV, and everything else together nice and neat in a series of films that all theme around a cataclysmic war of infinite timelines to end this era and start the next one. Thanks for watching. Please hit like, hit subscribe, share this with all the DCU haters and lovers. If you're in the position to help the channel grow, then visit our Patreon at patreon.com/toygalaxy and let us know in the comments below if you've auditioned to play a DCEU character recently, and if you are going to, who would you be? My agent had me read for the Joker, but who hasn't? But I'll be honest, my dream is, and then look, I left it blank. I don't know who my dream character is that I would play in the DC universe.